What if the cup of coffee you've been loyal to for 20 years is doing more than keeping you awake? What if it's quietly protecting you, stretching your lifespan, while also sabotaging your sleep and your nervous system? Stay with me, because this isn't a feel-good video. This is the truth about what it actually does to your body. Let me tell you about Dan. Dan is a 56-year-old senior government official, whose sharp mind kept him on the job despite the high pressure. He's usually up before sunrise, a cup of coffee before emails, coffee during briefings, coffee between meetings, coffee to just survive traffic. In the past few months, something felt off. Dan noticed he was alert but wired. He could focus but was restless. He feels exhausted at night, but he's sharp awake at 2 a.m. Dan assumed it was age, just life stress. What he didn't realize was, his coffee habit was shaping far more than his energy. It was influencing his heart rhythm. From his hormones to his brain chemistry to his gut, his whole body. Today we're breaking it down. The real science in understanding what's actually happening inside Dan's body every time he lifts that cup. This isn't about quitting coffee. And by the end, you'll know whether your coffee habit is helping you or quietly working against you. You mean coffee is keeping Emmy alive? Dan said it as a joke. But the doctor didn't laugh. So he went home and after 5 months of research, first thing he found out is that coffee isn't just caffeine. It's a chemical library of chlorogenic acids, polyphenol, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory compounds. Substances that influence how cells age, how blood vessels behave, how organs handle stress. Then came the part that landed hardest. Dan's research backed by years of studies. Millions of people being tracked in different countries showed him lower all-cause mortality. Not immortality, just better odds for a long life. Here's what the research kept pointing toward. Coffee drinkers show lower cardiovascular death rates because compounds in coffee support vascular function and reduce chronic inflammation. It lowers stroke risk because blood flow regulation improves and arterial stiffness declines. It reduces risk of diabetes complications, partly due to improved insulin sensitivity over time. It lowers incidence of certain cancers, especially liver-related ones, where coffee's protective compounds appear most active. For the first time, Dan didn't feel guilty about his morning ritual. The benefit wasn't unlimited. He felt intentional about the life he was living. Dan used to think coffee and heart health were enemies. He'd heard it everywhere. Coffee will mess with your heart. Coffee raises blood pressure. His go-to for a double espresso during any work deadline gave him a sudden awareness of his heartbeat. His research didn't frame coffee as the villain. It framed it as conditional, moderate intake. Here's what stood out. Coffee compounds lowers systemic inflammation, which directly affects heart disease progression. It supports better endothelial function, meaning blood vessels stay more flexible instead of stiffening over time. It lowers the risk of cardiometabolic multimorbidity, with fewer overlapping issues like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. It influences cholesterol metabolism, especially how LDL behaves in the bloodstream. Caffeine still has acute effects, such as raising heart rate and blood pressure. The key takeaway isn't to drink more coffee. It was know your body. Dan started paying attention to his intake. 1 cup in the morning, 2nd cup midday, and no cup after 5 p.m. The coffee wasn't harming his heart, the time he drank it was. Dan remembered asking his favorite barista a few months ago, "So, is coffee basically a legal energy drink?" She laughed at him but replied, "More like liquid chemistry. Coffee contains powerful compounds that have antioxidants properties. They neutralize oxidative stress inside the body. Oxidative stress accelerates aging. It damages cells and contributes to chronic disease over time." Dan's research uncovered specific benefits linked to coffee's antioxidant profile. Protection of brain cells from long-term degeneration. Slower cellular aging due to reduced oxidative damage. Improved cardiovascular resilience. Better post-stress recovery after long workout days. Support for metabolic health through reduced inflammation load. What surprised him most? Decaf coffee still carried many of these benefits. Dan didn't change his personality or coffee brand. He just stopped crashing by 11 a.m. Dan often quietly asked himself, "Is this cup of coffee actually helping, or just habit?" Turns out there's real science here. Research shows caffeine's effect on adenosine receptors. Those receptors influence movement control, dopamine activity, and neuroprotection. These studies link regular coffee consumption with a lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Basically, coffee interacts with the same systems that break down in Parkinson's. Dan's research notes kept stacking up. Evidence showed possible slower progression in already diagnosed patients. Neuroprotective effect through antioxidant and anti-inflammatory mechanisms. Dan didn't turn coffee into medicine. He just stopped treating it like a guilty pleasure. Some habits are noise while some are quiet protection. Coffee, he realized, can be both. Dan's go-to when trying to meet a deadline is a cup of espresso. One shot before brainstorming. Another before the edits. During the day, coffee made him sharp. As ideas connected faster and meetings felt shorter. Caffeine blocks adenosine. That is the chemical that tells the brain it is tired. By blocking the signal, alertness rises. Dan dug deeper with his research. It boosts short-term mood and motivation. It helps learning when used before focused study sessions. By improving brain reaction time and sustained attention. It supports task endurance during mentally heavy work. It improves perceived productivity, which reinforces momentum. Dan learned that coffee does more than keep eyes open. He found the other half of the story. Late caffeine cuts deep sleep. It shortens total sleep time even when you feel fine. It fragments sleep cycles that support memory and emotional regulation. It delays melatonin release, pushing sleep later. It creates a feedback loop. Poor sleep leads to more coffee the next day. Dan ran an experiment. No coffee after 1 p.m. 3 days later, he fell asleep faster and woke up without brain fog. Now his rule is simple: coffee is a tool when timed properly. When Dan joined the gym for the 4th time in the year, he noticed something. On days he drank coffee before workouts, sessions felt longer and lighter. Caffeine increases thermogenesis. That is the body burning more energy at rest. It also increases fat oxidation during exercise. That means the body leans more on fat as fuel when moving. Dan kept on with his research. Habitual coffee drinkers show lower risk of type 2 diabetes as polyphenol in coffee support insulin sensitivity. Over time it influences gut bacteria. Involved in glucose regulation. They support steadier blood sugar responses across the day. They reduce energy crashes that drive overeating later. Dan did not lose 20 pounds in a month. What changed was more significant. His sugar cravings to compensate for fatigue reduced. He trained with more consistency as his habits stabilized. Coffee did not replace discipline. It supported it. The more Dan paid attention to his mornings, the more he noticed a pattern he used to joke about. He spent 10 minutes in the bathroom. Dan learned that coffee stimulates something called the gastrocolic reflex. It signals the colon to move fast. His research showed the following. Coffee increases colonic movement shortly after drinking. It supports more regular bowel movements for people prone to constipation. The effect happens with both caffeinated and decaf coffee. Dan noticed his bloating reduced. His stomach felt lighter throughout the day. But he also discovered something else. On stressful days or after too much coffee, the effect became too strong. Mild but urgent stomach discomfort. So he adjusted. 1 strong cup in the morning. No overdoing it and not on an empty stomach. Dan's wake-up routine used to look like this. Breakfast of oatmeal, spinach smoothie. Coffee. Healthy on paper, but counterproductive in reality. Coffee blocks non-heme iron absorption when taken with meals. The more Dan researched, the clearer it became. Coffee can reduce iron absorption from plant foods by up to half. This effect is strongest when coffee is consumed during or right after meals. Low iron means fatigue. As people who eat mostly plant-based diets are more vulnerable. It affects concentration, immunity, and mood. Dan changed one simple habit. He moved his coffee away from meals by waiting about an hour after eating. Within weeks, his energy levels improved as his focus returned. Dan had a big pitch that afternoon. So he did what he always did. 2 cups of coffee back to back. His voice sounded sharp as the ideas came fast. But halfway through the meeting, his hands started shaking. Dan later learned why. Caffeine triggers a rise in cortisol, the body's main stress hormone. It boosts alertness in the short term, but it also increases physiological stress load. As Dan looked deeper into it, coffee spiked cortisol levels, which made his focus sharper but his nervous system more reactive. On already stressful days, coffee amplified his anxiety instead of helping him. Late afternoon cups disrupted his nervous system and made it harder to unwind at night. Dan didn't quit coffee. He changed how he drank it. Caffeinated coffee earlier in the day. He got more control by switching his 3rd cup to decaf. That adjustment gave him calmer focus instead of shaky intensity. Dan came across an article headline one night. Drinking more than 6 cups of coffee a day is linked to smaller brain volume. The research was saying excess was. Dan's takeaway became clear. Moderate coffee consumption is associated with lower risk of cognitive decline. Very high intake showed possible links to reduced brain volume. Sleep loss, dehydration, and overstimulation likely compounded the risk. He kept the morning cups and cut back the late-night ones. He protected his sleep. That shift made him sharper the next day. Habits shape outcomes and small choices into biological results. Dan's coffee reset. He caps his intake at 2-4 cups before early afternoon with intention for focus. He switches the last cup to decaf or tea. He keeps coffee away from meals with iron and at night time. He drinks it mostly black. He watches his sleep, mood, and focus weekly. The science behind his choices. Moderate intake supports longevity and metabolic health. Late caffeine disrupts deep sleep and recovery. Coffee near meals blocks iron absorption. Sugar-heavy add-ins erase many of coffee's benefits. Dan didn't give up coffee. Coffee stayed in his life. Just with boundaries. By adjusting timing and quantity. His body got alignment. Try the same experiment. Run it for 2 weeks. Let your data and body decide.
That's it for today. Make sure to drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned for more. Catch you in the next video.